With that said, we'll kind of get into today's goals. So today's all about kind of the proper way to run scholarships that really align with your mission to ultimately increase member engagement, but also build community trust. And the kind of the core element today is compliance, right? So with these scholarship programs, over the last, I like to say last couple of years, but really over the last decade, there's been a pretty fundamental shift in how scholarships are being provided, as well as kind of the expectations that the end consumer has from a compliance perspective, the blinding of the data, ensuring a fair, non-biased review and selection process, and things like that. And these are the types of things that we like to think about, not more workflow management stuff, but also, what does the experience look like for the consumer and for the volunteers that ultimately leads to the success of these programs and for your stakeholders. So those are the types of things I want to kind of focus on today. Obviously, we'll kind of dive deeper into some of the importance of these programs. So we're going to kind of go a little bit out of order today, but there's kind of like 4 or 5 key things I want to talk about. So I'm going to give you a quick 20-second introduction of who I am and what we're doing here at Reviewr. We'll kind of at a high level talk about the importance of a scholarship and how it pertains to your marketing and to your kind of community and member outreach programs. Obviously, if you're on the call today, I think we all understand the importance of these scholarships, which then kind of leads us into what are the core elements to make them a hit and a success. And so we'll start with some kind of housekeeping items, something that we call is a proof of process or a POP, which we'll get into. What does the applicant experience look like? So safeguarding confidential and private information. How do you collect external documentation, such as references or transcripts, and how does that kind of pertain to the workflow? And then really we'll dive deeper into what I find is maybe the more important aspect of things, which is the selection experience. So how do we kind of build up these impartial review workflows? How do we promote a objective, non-biased selection process? How do we leverage data and mathematics, right, to power these decision-making processes? Where ultimately, if a parent calls and says, "Hey, why did my son or daughter receive a scholarship?" we can kind of dig back into our portfolio and say, "Here's the proof of process was. Here's the proof that we followed it. Here's the results, etc." Ultimately elevating the experience for everybody involved. So with that said, I'll kind of give you my quick introduction. So my name is Kyle. I'm actually the CEO here at Reviewr. Been doing this now for over a decade, which is hard to believe. Really do have a deep background in what I call funding opportunities. So not just scholarships, but also kind of investments and things like that. And our background goes to paper. So we are part of these volunteer review and selection committees where back in 2010 platforms like us didn't exist. And so if you think through like what your scholarship programs look like, it was done through binders, right? So you literally had potentially hundreds of applicants or students or members who are building up these binders with their applications, their transcripts, their references, you name it, and they'd either physically drop it off or then mail it to us. And then from an organizational perspective, there's copies being made, right? One copy per review member. So, I mean, you're talking thousands and thousands sometimes of pages that need to be shared and sent back out to these review committees. And so there we are, kind of reading through these documents, handwriting notes, handwriting feedback, being a volunteer for a mission-driven organization. For us, it was more so how do we provide insights into why we selected people the way that we did, so that way those that don't get scholarships, don't receive funding, can take that feedback, have some type of self-development, self-growth, and then find success elsewhere, right? How do we provide value to everyone, not just those that receive funding? As you can imagine, with these programs being done through paper and binders, that never happened, right? We were handwriting notes that you just kind of got stuck and never share back. Over time, you started to see this transition where organizations would go online. And that's kind of where we're still at today. And what that really meant was that there was built-in web forms, Google Forms, documents, spreadsheets, emails, right? All these kind of third-party elements that make up a broader scope of the program that are being used, but none of them were intended for the task at hand. And then you start to see kind of this trickle downfall effect of what was going on. So, for example, hours and hours being spent in spreadsheets, manual manipulation of the data, lost information, human error, horror stories we started to hear. So, for example, there was an organization that was collecting these student applications through email, right? So, Susie Joe would email in her application with her transcripts and her references, and it went to a spam filter. So, a team literally sat down. They went through an entire review and selection process. They awarded money, and then months later, they found out that there were a handful of kids, high school seniors, that didn't even get a chance to get reviewed. So these are the experiences that led us to build Reviewr. Like, number one, that can never happen again. As a mission-driven organization, like that can never, ever, ever happen. In a highly regulated industry, now we're really starting to get ourselves into compliance issues. It's a bad look on donors and sponsors and stakeholders, et cetera. So the brainchild of Reviewr was, how do we build an online infrastructure that, number one, streamlines operations, how to make it so simple for everyone, not just you guys on the phone, but also the applicants, the volunteers, the review committees, so they can focus their time and energy on providing thoughtful and fair, non-biased reviews. How do we lower the barrier for the applicants to partake in these programs, not worrying about did you get it or not, or am I going to get a fair shot? But then number two is how do we just elevate the experience? These are core marketing programs and a direct reflection on you as an organization, and they should be treated as such. So at this point in time, we do thousands of these campaigns every year. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Reviewr as a platform today, but the idea behind us is that we have kind of a lever or a proven process in place for virtually every aspect that makes up a scholarship. If it's not relevant to you, that's fine. They don't get included. If you're one of the unique organizations with these really crazy, robust workflows, we got you covered as well. But the idea for most people is that we have a proven infrastructure of how to run scholarships the right way, not just from a technical perspective, but from a workflow perspective, that you can rapidly deploy a scholarship program and ensure that you're kind of meeting the needs of the consumer. So with that said, we'll kind of dive now into the bulk of today's conversation around why scholarships. And then two is how do we run them the right way to ensure member engagement, increase of assets, community impact and trust, et cetera. And again, I am keeping an eye on both the chat and the invites. So if anybody pops in, I can let them in. If you have any questions, feedback, or insights, again, please do throw them in the chat here. So why scholarships? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because I did kind of just give you the big spiel of why we exist. That's exactly why, we as an organization, or you as an organization, should be operating scholarships. For many of you, it is the flagship marketing campaign, or should be the flagship marketing campaign for your organization. And there's really one bullet here that I want to stress on, and then we're going to move on. The entire concept behind a scholarship is how do we build community awareness and build community trust. With that said, there's one core metric here, and that's the average age of a credit union member is now approaching 53 years old. And that's actually a trend that's happening across most associations in general, which is why, the challenges that we're helping alumni associations at major institutions solve, or, trade associations as well, is how do we start to penetrate a younger demographic of member, get them in at the age of 16, 17, 18 years old, and then hook them on for the next 60 years, and then build kind of continuation of families, right? That's all what it's about, is building community, building family, and not just increasing new membership in that younger demographic, but also expanding on existing memberships as well. So obviously, we're increasing our pipeline for future financial products. We're also kind of pushing, financial literacy to a different demographic that I think we could all agree at this point in time we definitely should be focusing on. So we can talk more later about the benefits of offering a scholarship program, but at its very core, that's kind of what it's all about. So if we are going to run these scholarships, how do we commit to excellence? And that's really what today's conversation is about. Nobody here is attending because they want to put half energy towards it. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it the right way. But we also want to make sure that we're protecting you as an organization from a compliance perspective, as well as offering the applicants the experience that they deserve. So everything kind of starts with what I call a proof of process. And we're going to run through a couple slides here that are more kind of a philosophy or thoughts behind it. And then I am going to show you exactly like what that could look like, not necessarily within Reviewr. You can do this however you want. Ideally, you use Reviewr, but you can kind of see firsthand, credit unions that are doing these types of things and what it looks like. I'm also going to follow up after this with an appendix section. So if you want to see like actual application forms or selection criteria or blinding of data, you can have that too to share with your teams. So number one, proof of process. We call it a POP. And it's actually kind of the core element that these entire programs need to start with. And so what is it? It's really a public-facing statement that outlines the entire application selection management process that sets a public and transparent expectation of what's going to go on. So at a very high level, when you apply for this scholarship, here's what you're going to go through. Here's what, how many applications will be reviewed per review member. Here's what the dates and deadlines look like, et cetera. And then when it's all over, here's the proof, if you need it, that we executed this plan. Now, by no means are you showing the proof right away. This really goes back to, I'm not even joking when I say this, I talked earlier about the organization prior to using Reviewr that had a handful of applicants in a spam filter. That happened. Like there were literally people that didn't even get included in the selection because they didn't even get reviewed. At the same time, we've heard these organizations that have these built-in review and selection processes that this is going to sound so bad. They just pick randomly the scholarship applicants, right? They say, okay, well, so-and-so isn't a member of the credit union, so therefore let's just make them the scholarship recipient so then they become a member. That can never happen. And so you have these parents that call up and say, my daughter is such a strong candidate, like why didn't she even get considered? And if without proof in the background that they followed the proof of process, we are now opening and exposing ourselves to some tremendous risk. So that's kind of the concept behind a proof of process. Now, we don't need to overdo that, but it is a very simple public facing element that says, hey, look, here's what you're going to go through. The 4 key elements that make up a proof of process should be like, what are the high level dates and deadlines? Again, that's just from a user experience. If you're applying, like, when do you expect to hear back? What are the different phases that go into it? Number 2 is going to be an outline of the actual submission process. So what type of information is being collected? What are you going to do with it? When the program is over, where is it going to go? And then an outline of the review and selection process. So once my application gets submitted, who's going to look at it? How many times is it going to get looked at? Is it blinded? Are you going to hide my demographic details? Things like that. And then the last piece would be like the post scholarship and awarding process. So like, when's it going to happen? Again, what are you going to do with my data? Things of that nature. So, excuse me, I'm going to kind of at a high level talk through those 4 elements. Again, you can take as many notes as you want. You can take screenshots. I will send this out later. And then we're going to look at kind of 2 pieces to this. We're actually going to focus on the middle section. So what does the submission process look like to ensure a proof of process? And then number 2 is what does a typical review and selection process looks like to ensure an objective selection. So number 1, pretty straightforward, right? Dates and deadlines. You got to make sure that when people, and this might even be part of like the legal side of things, having like a terms and conditions concept, but when our application is opening and closing, can you ensure that applications will close at that deadline? So for example, if I get my application at 11:55 p.m. Central Time, somebody else applies at 12:02 a.m., are they included in the review process? Because that's not inside your terms and conditions. So you got to make sure that you are adhering to these things. More best practices. This is completely off topic, but don't set your deadlines to be midnight. Far too many people act like these programs are American Idol where there's just this big buildup. We're talking about a demographic of people that will procrastinate. So whatever your deadline is, expect the bulk of volume to come in within like the final 5 to 6 hours. And when I say bulk of the volume, I mean like the last 10 minutes. So make it at a reasonable time. Once applications come in, we want to have like a transparent communication process so people know that, hey, not only was your application received, but now here's what the next step is, which would be like an internal review and kind of cleansing period. So before we start to review all these scholarship applications, like let's just slow things down a little bit. Let's look at the information. Do we have what we need? Do we need to reach back out to certain people for clarifying information? How are we going to decide who's going to be reviewed by who? Kind of put that stuff in place and then actually begin the review process. And then within each of these phase 1 reviews, phase 2 reviews, this is all going to be dependent upon your volume and your desires, but providing transparency to the applicants along the way. We are now entering phase 1 review, or unfortunately, you did not make phase 2. We will follow up at the end with more information, right? So just people are not hanging and waiting, like, where am I? What's the next step? From an application perspective, I know there's a lot of bullets here. Again, I will send this completely out to everybody, but there's 4 kind of key elements here. So you want to outline like what are the details of the application process. So I did note the portal being used because inevitably we have this kind of concern in 2024 of like, what is my digital presence? If I'm submitting information to you, how can I ensure that you're going to hold on to it in a very secure and compliant manner? So whatever portal you use, ideally Reviewr, it needs to be a proven platform, right? That's powering these types of programs they have confidence in, but also look for things like a SOC 2 type 2 compliance, kind of the industry standard for data security and privacy, highly audited, things like that. That way you can have kind of trust within the community that, hey, if you're using this portal, you're submitting your FAFSA or your transcripts or whatever those deliverables might be, that it is being handled in a very, very confidential and secure manner. You'd be shocked at the number of scholarship applications I found online that are using fillable PDFs or built-in web forms, either through like a SurveyMonkey tool or a form, whatever it might be, where they have like social security numbers and student grades, right? At this point in time, like student identifiable information is as simple as the first name, last name of the school that they attend. And so again, like that just can't be submitted through fillable PDFs and forms. Number 2 is more of like a showcase of like what questions are going to be asked. This is also just from a best practice perspective that no matter how efficient these platforms and tools are, the applicants want to know what's being requested of them, give them ample time to track down those deliverables. They can work offline and then come back and start to load up the platform or the forms or the tools with their answers. References. This is a side conversation we'll kind of touch on today a little bit. But if there's other external individuals that are contributing to the program, references, transcripts, it could be parent confirmation forms, whatever it might be. What's their expectations? And then also kind of equipping the applicant with success to get it in their hands sooner than later. Because again, if we know that applicants are going to procrastinate, we also want to make sure that the other people that are contributing and helping them along are also giving their time to put towards these programs. And then this is kind of a little bit redundant, but just reiterating that, like, outlining your data and security, privacy, both protocols and policy. So not just like, hey, for example, like Reviewr is a SOC 2 type 2 compliant company, they're audited, et cetera, but also, you know, at the end of the program, like, here's what we're going to do with your information. It's not going to be sold, right? Like, not just from the platform perspective, but you, right? What are you doing with it? You know, if you want to have like a text messaging or SMS opt-in to communicate with both parents and or the members or the students, you know, start to collect that type of information, et cetera. So just, again, when you submit, here's what we're going to do with your information. Probably more importantly, and maybe that's not true because data security is at its core one of the most important aspects of these programs, but it's then outlining the selection process. If my son or daughter applies to a scholarship program, I want to ensure that she's going to get the exact same eyes on her application and the exact same fair selection as any other candidate. So outlining, like, what does that look like? Like, what is the review process? How many stages is it? What's the criteria that you're looking for? Is it going to be blinded? So when the review team sits down, can they see my name? Can they see my demographic background? Can they see my parents' information? Can they see my member history, right? Is there a bias towards member versus non-member? And it's actually flipped. Again, you know, I've heard this before. Why would we select a member for a scholarship when we can get a new member? So things like that we just want to outline, like, look, here's what the process looks like. And then at its very core, we're going to get into an example here next. The entire concept of a proof of process is having infrastructure or tools in place that map one-to-one to every single one of these items. So for example, the submissions are going to be assigned randomly to my review team. How do we then show at the end of the day that, yes, we actually did this? Or do you have the capability to actually execute on that plan? So with that said, I'm going to jump really quickly here into Reviewr, and we're going to look a little bit at the application side of things, which is going to be the data portion of it. And then if you have any questions or if you want me to look at a couple of things in a bit more detail, please do let me know. So the first thing that we want to cover, we're going to look at is kind of two parts. So the safeguarding of applicant information. So what are we collecting? How are we collecting it? How should we collect it? What should we be collecting? And then number two is the references. I'm actually going to pause here and I'm going to, at a high level, inject my thoughts on references, and then we'll get going. Because this is a very big shift within the industry that I think everybody needs to be aware of. So most scholarship programs at this point in time are collecting references, and rightfully so. The applicant can write essays about themselves. They can talk all about their achievements, but we want to hear from other people, like what makes Jimmy such a strong community member. The problem with a reference is that a lot of times it's been done in a letter format, and a couple issues are coming on with letters. Number one is it's hard. If you've ever been asked to write a reference for somebody else, you're not only being asked at the very last minute, but you're asked to sit down at a blank sheet of paper and come up with your thoughts from scratch. My wife is a significantly better writer than I am. If she was to submit a reference on behalf of somebody versus me, that applicant is going to be significantly better than me. But is that a fair representation of the candidate themselves, or is it a reflection on the person that wrote the letter? And so what we started to see here in the last year or so, or 6 months, is ditching reference letters completely. And instead, we'll get into how Reviewr can power this. But basically a notification process that goes out to the reference that says, you know, dear Tony, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle, click here to do so. But then instead of submitting a letter, Tony submits a template. And it's like, what are the 3 to 5 things you want every reference to describe? Ideally, those 3 to 5 elements tie directly to your organization's mission and value and kind of what keeps you up at night. That way you're getting a different side of the applicant, right? But it's no longer a reference letter, it's a template. The benefits behind this is that you lower the barrier for the reference. They just need to answer a couple of questions. Number two is it makes blinding of data significantly easier because we know it's in those text fields. We don't know what's in the letter or a physical piece of paper. And then number three, and this is probably the most important aspect, is that if that content is included in the review side of things, we now have consistent data. So every single candidate has the exact same answers or reference, template questions or data sets associated with them. So we can kind of help ensure that there's a fair review process. In fact, you can even tie those 3 questions directly into a scorecard where they answer, questions 1, 2, and 3, etc. So let's look at some of this in Reviewr off to my right-hand side. And I just want to kind of show you an example of a real credit union using Reviewr very specifically, though, of how they structured their process to kind of map with both proof of process and then also what I feel is a very, very well done scholarship application for 2 reasons. One is it's low barrier, and number 2 is they're collecting the absolute essential information that they need for a fair, non-biased selection process. So let's take a quick look. The vast majority of organizations we work with rightfully should be using their own web presence. You've got a strong brand, you've got strong content control, so leverage it. So they use their own website, they have information about the program. You will want to put somewhere on here your proof of process. I'm going to send this back out, but like, as you can see here, they started that process here recently where they actually are doing kind of FAQs that maps to your proof of process. So within there's going to be dates and deadlines, what is the selection criteria, all that kind of fun stuff. They also put in here kind of an actual terms and conditions as well, such as, if you're not a member, you're going to be asked to join, what the membership rates are, all that kind of fun stuff. Just because we have this out there, though, that doesn't mean people are going to read it. So 2 things are consistent. Number 1, people will always procrastinate. And number 2, people will ignore important information. They're going to look for the shiny apply button. So what does that mean? Leverage one of our landing pages. So this is a very rudimentary, simple version of it, but it's kind of a middleman between your web presence and then the application portal. And this is also where you can kind of reiterate kind of all those dates, deadlines, expectations, proof of process, guidelines, all that kind of fun stuff. But the main goal here is to reiterate it. Again, I'm going to go back a few slides on the left for proof of process, and then we'll get into the application side of things, which starts right here. And I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on Reviewr. Again, I wanted to showcase the actual application form. What I do want to show, though, is that there's so many moving parts to a scholarship. You have applicants, you have their information, which is actually quite broad because you have their initial submission form, potentially file uploads, videos, photos, references, transcripts. There's likely at some point going to be communication between you and them, potentially also including parents or other members. And then there's going to be a review and selection side of things. And then at the end of the day, the post-awarding process. So, where should the funds be sent to? Like, what does that look like? And so the entire concept within Reviewr is it's a profile system. So the applicant creates a profile, and then that profile holds on to all of those elements in one centralized hub. There's no kind of bouncing back and forth and leaving the tool set, et cetera. So that's what we're looking at here. Again, kind of skipping through that. What I do want to show you, though, is this example application form. It's about 6 pages, pretty quick and simple. But they've really, really started to push proof of process, right? Again, they're reiterating, like, you have to be a member, you have to be a resident of Louisiana, you have to have a certain GPA. They will be going deeper into this with like, here's what the process looks like once you apply. They're ensuring that, the deadline is at a certain day and at a certain time, et cetera. Some people will do a confirmation on this page. So in this example, at the very last page, the applicant has like an e-signature, but you could say, I agree to the terms and conditions above at this point if you wanted to. This also might be where you do like a checkbox for opt-in for future communication with you as the credit union or the institution. So either SMS, newsletters, things like that. Again, leverage the data collection process to also power your other marketing campaigns. As far as the content itself goes, this is what I call like an eligibility side of things. And again, I skipped through these slides on purpose. I'm going to share this back out later on. But it's like what aspects go into an application form. And one of them is going to be eligibility. So this is, again, very dependent on what your own scholarship structure looks like. We have some organizations that do a significant number of scholarships, and each one of them might have completely different eligibility and different types of criteria. And so if that is the case, you can do a couple things. You can elevate the applicant's experience by saying, hey, based on what you just added to the platform, you're not even eligible. So you're not going to waste their time filling things out. 2, you're going to save you a whole heck of a lot of time as well, not having to vet through a bunch of applications that weren't even qualified because they were part of a different state, right? At the same time, I've seen some organizations do these really cool eligibility kind of quizzes that says, what's your GPA? Where do you want to go to college? What field of study you want to go into? And then based off of those answers, our system can actually spit out recommendations of what scholarships that they're eligible for. So this might not be relevant to you. We have a school foundation that does 100 scholarships. For the vast majority of students, they don't even know which of those 100 they can even apply to. So they fill out this quiz and it says, hey, based on what you just entered, here's the 3 you can apply for. And if one of those 3 previously wouldn't have been aware of, total win, because now we just made scholarships accessible to people that weren't aware that they existed. So again, kind of the robust nature of the forms. In this example, it's going to basically say if you're not a member, it's going to redirect them to like another type of form that either you can start to either add them as a member, go through that process, or we at least will kind of bucket them separately, because at some point, if they do get selected, we need to kind of convert them at some point. As far as the application itself goes, here's kind of where I think the structure on this example is laid out quite well. So the first page of it is basically breaking out like, who are you as an applicant? So this would be the submitter. So it could be a member, it could be a student, whoever the submitter is. Then it gets into, if you have a parent, like what is their information? How did you hear about us? For the marketers in the room, this is all about attribution. So if you're spending, LinkedIn ad spend money or paper money or social media money, how do you know that it's actually converting? You can start to do so here. The next page of the form is going to get a bit deeper into like what that individual's current education standings look like. So I think I actually have another slide that we can help kind of power this over here. There we go. So off to the left, it'll basically go in real time what we're looking at. So yeah, what current school you go to, what's your current GPA? Again, we have clients that will say, hey, you're a 2.94, but the requirements are 3. We can stop them at that point. We have other clients that take into consideration their grades into the score sheets. So this actually could allocate a point value. So if I had a 2.9, I might get 1 point. If I had a 3.0, I might get 2 points. If I had a 3.5, I get 3 points, right? So the system is already allocating scores per se based off of the content being filled out. Now we're going to get more into the achievement side of things. So this is, again, we want to keep it short and sweet, but the general idea behind a scholarship application should not be solely focused on grades. Yes, absolutely will those be taken into consideration. But what is this, the applicant's personality? Tell us more about like their story. What is their community impact? So we want to know more about like what are their achievements, what are their awards, what are their recognitions. If you want to ask for up to 15, like in this example, you can do so, but start to collect that information. The next page is going to be more so on volunteer opportunities. So like, what's your involvement within our community? Things like that. We even have some clients in this example too, that they're able to add multiple volunteer opportunities. And as you can see, there's a total hours of service. That is, in this example, this is actually powering the selection process. So people who, have 30 hours get 10 points, things like that. So we're taking this off of your review team side of things and automating it for you. Now, here's where the rubber hits the road. So short answers and essays, this is allowing the applicant to kind of tell a story about themselves. Like, why are they deserving of this scholarship? It could be essay format. I've even seen a lot of videos at this point. So like the student or the applicant can record a 3-minute video clip saying, hey, I'm Kyle, I want to go to college to be a veterinarian. Here's why I'm passionate about it, which is really cool for a couple of reasons. One is in the review side of things, it's super, super engaging. And then number 2 is what happens if that person wins a scholarship? How great of marketing collateral would that individual's testimonial or video be for like a celebration newsletter that you send out to your members? So things like that. I talked a little bit earlier about references and transcripts. I'm going to kind of highlight it here, but we'll move on to the review side of things here as well. So within our platform, in this example, I have both my transcript upload as well as my references. In that use case, Dr. Tom Nelson actually gets an email saying, hey, Dr. Tom, Kyle's asked you to submit a reference on his behalf. Click here to do so. When Dr. Tom clicks on that link, again, no more letters. Dr. Tom fills out 3 questions telling people about how great Kyle is. And then as soon as he submits, that template gets automatically added back to the applicant's profile. Again, you can blind the data, things like that. I'm not going to get too much again into management today, but really, really, really cool and innovative workflows. The next thing we'll look at is the file upload. So a lot of times I do kind of note this off to the left is that not all deliverables need to be collected right away. The beauty of a platform like Reviewr and this concept of a profile is maybe you don't want people to submit transcripts right away. It's a barrier. So let's drop it. Maybe you don't need their headshots or their photos right away. So why don't we just save that for the finalists or even those that get selected for a scholarship? And if that is the case, they just come back into their profile and says, congratulations, you've been awarded a scholarship. Now you need to fill out your acceptance form, give us your transcript, and add your photo. They then upload it. So again, we're saving people time and energy, because if they don't get selected, we don't even need it. Within Reviewr, we can take in about 130 files. The best part about that, and I'll show this to you, is that they get embedded. So literally you and your team and the review committees can watch videos, they can look at photos, they can look at references, all in Reviewr, without having to leave the platform and then come back later and leave your notes and comments. Here's that e-signature I talked about. Again, a lot of people will actually move this to the very front. So yes, as an applicant, I adhere to your terms and conditions. Let's get going, versus at the very end saying, I adhere. Again, here's your opt-out or your opt-ins for SMS or communication, things like that. So we're going to move on to the review side of things here in just a second. As I do so, any questions, comments, thoughts, again, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll also open it up to Q&A at the end. So as we get into the review side of things, again, I'm going to follow up with everything we talked about here today. I do have kind of a really cool section here as well called the credit union experience. So you as a program manager, like, what does your day in life look like? Because you probably are asking yourselves, okay, Kyle, I love the concept of having these references get submitted in this template format, but then how do I ensure that we actually get them? So that's like your dashboards come into play, where it shows you, like, here's how many applicants you've received, here's who's done, here's who's in progress. Here's how many outstanding references have been requested versus those that are done, those are not done. How do you send them reminder messages? How do you assign them to your team? That's kind of the credit union experience, which I'm not going to talk about today, but just know we got you covered. But what I do want to look at next is the selection experience, because again, this is really where the compliance and the proof of process gets bookend. So when it comes to the review and selection process, there's kind of 2 to 3 kind of key elements that we need to talk about. Number one is, after all these applications come in, how do you give them to your team? What I mean by that, and this is going to be a question that you have to ask yourself internally, is it committee based? Is your board or your executive committee reviewing every application? Are you going to do an internal vetting process first and then do review and selections? What is the number of submissions my review team can look at? This is an extreme example. What if you got 1,000 applications and your review committee is 6 people? Like, you physically can't have those 6 people look at all 1,000. I've seen it happen. Sure, they might be able to tucker down and do it, but is it actually, are they able to give the energy that the applicants deserve? Probably not. So if that is the case, what is that number? How do you distribute them out? Are you going to do it in an equal fashion, so every review person gets a completely random set of applications? What do you do if there's a conflict of interest? Again, this is all rhetorical type of stuff, but if you have like a review committee that is, a golfing buddy with one of the applicant's parents, they probably shouldn't be reviewing them. So how do you catch that? How do you unassign them? How do you assign them back out? You might be laughing a little bit at some of these items, but these are things that are happening. And in an audit and in a compliant workflow, like, these are things that will end up being a problem if it happens. So yeah, we got you covered on all those different types of things. The second piece to this is that, great, we figured out this magic formula of taking our scholarship applicants and divvying it out to our team for review. Now what happens? So again, how do I make sure that there's no personal information, no addresses, no emails, no names, no demographic being hidden from the review team, to ensure that they're evaluating the candidate based off of their volunteer hours and their grades and their essays, not who they are, who their parents are, what their backgrounds look like. On top of that, too, from a review perspective, how do we not overwhelm them? Because so many of these programs are volunteer driven, or my gut tells me that when you come into the office every day, your sole job responsibility isn't playing in spreadsheets, emails, downloading of documents for your scholarship programs. There's other kind of key initiatives that you're focused on. So how do we help you stay hyper focused on the task at hand, execute it at a very high level, while allocating your time to absolutely everything that deserves your attention? So what that typically means is that if you're collecting data that isn't necessary for the selection process, just don't give it to the review team. Like, they don't need to see it. Don't overwhelm them. Obviously, a platform like Reviewr helps pretty tremendously with that task at hand. So that's great. So now we have the applications divvied out. We're controlling what they're seeing. So then the last piece is, how do we actually conduct a selection process? And this is a very open for discussion concept. I've seen deliberation, I've seen score sheets, I've seen a combination of both. But the general idea here is that not only do we have to blind the data, but we want to use some type of quantitative data-driven selection process, where the review team is reviewing the merits of the application and the reference with a score sheets kind of side by side, allocating points based off of whatever you want them to review on. We don't want to overwhelm people. This doesn't need to be overly complicated, but it's like on a scale of 1 to 5, what is this person's volunteer impact on our local community? On a scale of 1 to 5, post scholarship, like their career ambition, how is that going to map back to the mission and vision of the credit union? On a scale of 1 to 5, what is their academic background in comparison to other candidates, right? Things like that. But very, very specifically, having a tool in place that can read those answers, allocate the points that you're not doing. Again, I like to think by now we're all very, very good at using Excel, but pivot tables, crunching numbers, adding formulas, it's prone to human error. You might have a fully compliant, non-biased review and selection process. You're blinding the data. But what happens if the formula is just ever so slightly off and the wrong person is selected as a recipient, right? So things like that. So what does that look like? So in Reviewr, there's kind of a couple different things that we'll look at, but at its core, here's how a very common workflow would look. And again, off to the left, we'll have kind of, 6 different bullets that kind of power this. Number one is you have to add your team, right? So you have to be able to give access to these applications. And I can assure you, the modern consumer is looking for a digital transformation. It's 2024. These applicants are doing it on their phones. Your review team, while they still may like, paper processes or whatever it might be, the benefits at the end of the day for you as an organization and the applicants to go digital is tremendous. And so how do we make it super simple to use these online tools to conduct these processes? So number one, we load up Reviewr with your staff, who the review committees are. You can either add them, you can import them, they can sign up. Once they're in the platform, here's kind of really where the rubber hits the road. So we have a concept called buckets. And what most groups will do is, again, our team is here from a consultation perspective to kind of figure out like, what does your process look like? And then how would we best, not just within Reviewr, but in general, structure a selection. So there's kind of a couple different ways I see reviews done. Number one is they take all their applicants and they put them into buckets. So in this example, they got 4 different review teams, A, B, C, and D. That's likely done from like a volume perspective, or each bucket of committee members is looking at like 5 candidates or 10 candidates, whatever it might be. If you have a large number of scholarships, or even if you have multiple scholarships, so just more than one, maybe you have like a bucket per scholarship as well. Maybe you have multi-phases. So you have the initial applications come in, they get vetted. Then once they get vetted, they go to a phase 2 review, which uses a score sheet. And then the phase 3 review, which might be an interview or it might be the board selection. And then maybe the last bucket would be like, great, this is all of our applicants who got selected, because now we need more deliverables from them. So the concept of buckets in Reviewr is super powerful. You can create as many as you want. You can have logic that puts people in them automatically. But at its core, let's look at an example. So I have group A. So we're going to make an assumption that we've got a whole bunch of applicants in group A. So then what do we do next? We give group A to a team of reviewers. So we got Paula, Mark, Judge, Judy, et cetera. So when they come into Reviewr, they're going to see all the applicants in whatever bucket that they've been given access to. Now, this serves the challenge of not overwhelming committee members by kind of keeping them condensed to a subset of submissions. But you can actually open these buckets up. And here's where like the real compliant nerds on the call get super excited. Because what you can do is you could say, hey, look, I have this many applications. I have this many reviewers. I don't really care who reviews who. I want to make sure that it's a random distribution. I want to make sure that it's a fair distribution. So I'm going to say every candidate gets reviewed no more than 5 times, no less than 4. Or maybe I want every single applicant to get reviewed exactly 3 times, no less, no more. That way we can ensure that it's random, we can average it out, etc. So in Reviewr, you can literally bulk select your applicants or your review team and give them that number. So each one gets no more than 6, no less than 4. What happens if there's a conflict of interest? What happens if somebody drops out inevitably? You can override these settings. So in this example, I got Mark here. Mark is a review member. I know for a fact that Mark is golfing buddies with Gabrielle's mom. So I can unchoose Gabrielle and then divvy out Gilligan. So really powerful things that are going on here. One, saves your team a heck of a lot of time kind of assigning submissions out for review. But number 2 is that we in bulk and automated can start to ensure random distribution, blinding, non-bias, etc. So great. We have all these applications that came in. We assign them to our review teams. Now what? So when the review team comes into the platform, they get a menu. And again, this is why obviously I'm going to promote Reviewr, because otherwise I don't know how you would do this. But they get a menu of all the applicants that they're supposed to look at. I did try to highlight here that you need to blind this. You don't have to, right? Best practices, blind the data. So don't show them the names of the applicants, etc. But the review team would simply click on like the name or the applicant's ID number. And then there is that kind of, I call it like a virtual binder concept, where we take the applicant's profile. We also tack on a score sheet or a selection tool. That selection tool can be completely custom. So thumbs up, thumbs down, good, great, ugly, sad face, smiley face. This example, I think, is a bit better. This is a real scorecard where the judge is rating the applicant on scholastic achievement, their extracurricular achievements, what's their leadership capacity, what's their community involvement. It gets into like their essay writing, things like that. But the idea here is that your team can side by side view the application. As you can see here, we're also going to blind all this stuff. So again, I don't need to know Billy's name. I don't need to know Billy's background. I do need to know Billy wants to go to the University of Delaware, and I do need to know why Billy is a strong candidate for this scholarship. So the idea is that your team can side by side access the information, fill out the score sheets. This is mathematic based. So for every choice, poor, below average, average, etc., there's a point value associated with it. You can't see that here, but on the back end, we're actually creating like this leaderboard. The review team can side by side jump up to the file uploads. They can look at the attachments. I talked earlier about the types of file uploads. They can physically watch a video. They can look at a photo here. If you are doing reference requests, it'll show you the references here as well. But at the end of the day, when the review committee is done vetting this and they submit it, it's going to kick out a leaderboard that looks like this. So from a program operations perspective, you can see in real time a listing of every applicant you have. It's going to show you who reviewed it, if they've even reviewed it or not, because you might have to send your own team reminders to get their work done, total scores, averages, etc. So I know for a fact that I'm going to give out 3 scholarships to this group. Here's my first, second, and third and fourth place applicants. I can pick them as recipients. Now, again, Caleb here as a scholarship applicant, in theory, can come back into the platform and fill out acceptance letters, add their headshots, all that kind of fun stuff as well. If it's a multi-phase program, great, you can bulk select individuals and then advance them to like phase 2 or phase 3. So again, we're not making decisions for you. We're giving you the data that you need to make informed decision-making on who the recipients might be. I'm going to kind of preview one last quick thing while I wait for questions to come in, but ultimately those are kind of the main goals for today. We have about maybe 10 or so minutes left for Q&A if you want to throw some questions in there. I did talk a little bit about the document collection, because I do love the idea behind video submissions. I think they're just super engaging. But what I do know is that they're relatively complex without a platform like Reviewr to not just collect, but also do something with it. And so I'm going to jump over quickly to the credit union's experience. If I kind of jump along here a little bit, this is our dashboard. But then it also gives you as a program manager a menu of all of the applicants you received. So you can sort, you can filter by status. And then if I open up, say, for example, Leslie here, or Caleb, there's Caleb's application form. You could actually communicate with Caleb if you wanted to. You could log internal notes about Caleb. But if I jump up here in a second to my attachments, here's where it's going to show me a list of every document or deliverable we ever collected from him or her. This is going to be like a PDF form. But if I choose a image, you'll notice that it embeds itself right in Reviewr. So again, really powerful for collecting multimedia. Yes, that is my son. Yes, I am already promoting him for scholarships. Someone's got to pay for his scholarships in 15 years. And then the other thing I want to kind of showcase here too is going to be the supplemental documents. So again, I love this feature where we request references from external individuals. Again, without a platform like Reviewr, I don't physically know how you would do this. So in this example, I have like Caleb and then I have Millie or Miley. When Miley got that notification saying, hey, Miley, Caleb's asked you to write him a reference, as soon as she submits it, it looks like this. So that's a transcript. And then you'd have like a reference template there, right? So you'd actually be able to physically view the form that Miley filled out. It also would make the applicant and you have visibility on like what references haven't done their job yet, so they can do their own follow-ups. While we're a software provider, I mean, we built this really incredible tool. What we really pride ourselves on are the relationships that we've built with your peers within the space, and helping kind of bridge the gap between, the right way of doing things as well as things that we see other people doing, that we think you should be aware of. So yeah, with that said, if there's any questions, let me know. I really appreciate your attendance today, and looking forward to the next one.